The storm was relentless. Just days ago, everything was perfect. Ethan Miller had built his business from the ground up, pouring his heart and soul into each product, each partnership. He had a dream, a vision that felt invincible. But today, it all came crashing down. The scandal broke wide open, splashed across every headline, every news feed. His investors pulled out. Social media exploded with insults and accusations. The media tore into him like vultures on a carcass. His trusted business partner, Marcus, who had once stood beside him through every challenge, turned his back, siding with the corporate giants in the industry. Ethan watched as his reputation crumbled in real time. He tried to speak out, to defend himself, but the words felt hollow. No one wanted to hear his side anymore. The damage was done, and his world was collapsing in front of his eyes. The once promising future now seemed like a distant memory. With every call he made, every attempt to salvage what was left, it became clearer. Some filled with concern, most with condemnation. A suffocating silence followed. He didn't know where to turn or if he could even keep going. The hardest part? Realizing how alone he was in the battle. The path forward, if there was one, felt terrifyingly uncertain. But in that moment of despair, there was a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark, a question that hovered at the edge of his mind. What now? The fall had just begun, but the road to redemption would be the most painful journey of his life. Ethan's phone buzzed incessantly. Calls, texts, emails. It felt like a tidal wave crashing against him. The notifications were endless, and he couldn't escape it. His inbox was flooded with messages from reporters, lawyers, friends, and even strangers. He knew that his reputation was shattered, but seeing it all in writing was a blow to his soul. He didn't have the answers. His trust in people, in the business, was evaporating, leaving behind a hollow shell of who he once was. Marcus's betrayal had felt like a stab in the back, but it was the media's relentless attack that cut the deepest. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them were kind. Ethan stood by the window, watching the storm outside, his reflection blurry in the glass, mirroring his own confusion and despair. It was as if the world outside was just as chaotic as the one in his mind. What had he done wrong? Was it his fault? The questions lingered, unanswered. His company, the very thing he had built, now seemed like a distant dream. The harder Ethan's phone rang again, an incoming call from his investor, Greg Toma, a successful businessman who had funded his vision early on. Ethan stared at the screen for a moment, then answered, knowing this call could determine his fate. Greg's voice was stern, but there was a hint of concern underneath. Ethan, we've got to talk. This situation isn't good. I'm pulling out. The words hit Ethan like a punch in the gut. He had hoped that maybe, just maybe, Greg would stand by him. But he knew, deep down, that this was the reality he had been avoiding. The news had spread like wildfire, and now no one seemed willing to stick around. His entire future, the dream he had worked so hard to build, was slipping away. I understand, Greg, Ethan said, his voice strained. Conversation ended shortly after, and Ethan sat in silence. The weight of the decision settled on him like a crushing burden. He had never imagined that one scandal, one mistake, could cost him everything. His phone buzzed again, but this time he didn't look. He knew what was coming. Messages of rejection, offers to buy. The day dragged on in a blur of meetings and phone calls. Ethan felt like a shell of the person he once was. His confidant Rachel had called several times, but he couldn't bring himself to speak to her. What could he say? The woman who had stood by him for years, who had always believed in him, now had to watch as everything fell apart. She had been the voice of reason, the one who kept him grounded when his ambition had clouded his judgment. Ethan couldn't bear to hear her pity, even though he knew she was worried about him. After hours of trying to put out fires and failing, Ethan finally answered Rachel's call. Ethan, you have to talk to me. This isn't the end, she said, her voice calm but firm. You've faced worse before. We can rebuild. You just have to trust yourself. Ethan's eyes welled up with tears, and he squeezed his phone tightly, feeling the flood of emotion. I don't know if I can. Everything's gone, Rachel, all of it. She sighed, her voice softening. I'm here for you, but you need to. Later that evening, Ethan stood outside the office building, the wind biting at his skin. The world felt distant, as though he was no longer a part of it. He had always prided himself on his ability to control the narrative, to steer his business in the right direction. But now, he couldn't even control his own life. The reality of the situation was sinking in. He was alone in this, without the people he trusted, without the empire he had built. He closed his eyes, taking in a deep breath of cold air, hoping it would clear his mind. But the weight of everything was suffocating. He couldn't escape it. His phone buzzed once again, but he ignored it. Ethan knew he needed to find a way forward, but how? The future was uncertain, and every step he took felt like a leap into the unknown. There was no map to guide him. The only certainty was that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Yet, even in the depths of despair, a small part of him wondered if there was a chance for redemption. Could he turn this disaster? Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's life remained in a constant state of turmoil. Every time he turned on the news, he was met with a new wave of insults, critiques, and accusations. His once loyal employees had scattered, some taking offers from competitors, others leaving the industry entirely. His phone rarely rang with good news anymore. Only calls from lawyers, creditors, or the occasional concerned family member. But today was different. Ethan had called a meeting with his remaining team, hoping to salvage what was left of his company. His heart pounded in his chest as he sat at the head of the table, staring at the few loyal faces still left in the room. The silence was deafening. No one spoke. It felt like the calm before a storm. Finally, Rachel spoke up. Ethan, you can't keep running from this. We need a plan. You need to make a decision. Are we going down with this ship, or are we going to fight? Her voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear. Ethan looked around at the faces in the room. As the days wore on, the pressure mounted. Ethan had started reaching out to old contacts, people who might be able to help him pull the company from the brink of collapse. His calls were mostly unanswered, and when they were returned, the responses were curt, indifferent. The industry had moved on. It seemed there was no room for failure in the fast-paced world he had once dominated. Then came the call that Ethan had dreaded. A meeting with his rival, David Klein, a corporate titan who had built his empire on crushing competition. Klein had always seen Ethan as a threat, and now that Ethan was down, David saw an opportunity to finish him off. Ethan, I've always respected your hustle, Klein's voice boomed from the other end of the line. But you've made your mistakes, and now I'm going to make sure you pay for them. Ethan's stomach sank. Klein wasn't just talking about business. This was personal. David had the power, the resources, and the media connections to completely annihilate Ethan's remaining rep. The next day, Ethan sought advice from his mentor, Robert Greene, a seasoned entrepreneur who had weathered his fair share of storms. Robert had seen it all. The highs, the lows, the rise and fall of empires. Ethan had always admired Robert's wisdom, and now, more than ever, he needed it. You've got to stop playing defense, Ethan, Robert said, his voice gravelly but confident. You're trying to put out a fire with a garden hose. You need to change the game, make them see you as a force to be reckoned with again. Ethan sat back, absorbing the advice. But how? I don't have the resources I once did. People don't trust me anymore. How do I rebuild from nothing? Robert chuckled softly. You start by taking back control. This isn't about building from scratch. It's about leveraging what you have left and showing the world you're not done yet. Don't let the headlines define you. You define them. Ethan nodded slowly, feeling a spark of inspiration. Robert was right. It was time to stop being reactive and stand. Inspired by Robert's words, Ethan spent the next few days carefully crafting a new strategy. He started reaching out to old partners and potential investors. But this time, he was more strategic. He wasn't begging for help, he was offering a vision. One of those calls led to a meeting with a potential investor, Gregory Wells, a venture capitalist known for taking risks on underdog companies. Gregory was intrigued, but skeptical. "You've got a lot of work to do if you want me on board, Ethan. You're in a hole and everyone is watching to see if you can get out of it. I don't make investments in failures." Ethan knew the stakes were high. He had to make Gregory believe in his vision, in his ability to rise from the ashes. The meeting was tense, and at times Ethan could feel his confidence wavering. But he held it together, speaking passionately about his ideas and the lessons he had learned. By the end of the meeting, Gregory was still on the fence, but he agreed to give Ethan a chance. "I'm willing to ta." Despite the brief glimmer of hope with Gregory, the days that followed were still filled with stress. Ethan continued to juggle calls, meetings and preparations, all while dealing with the pressure of a relentless media. His every move was under a microscope. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling day, he sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. The numbers weren't adding up, and the weight of his failure pressed down on him. He wanted to scream, to throw everything away. But then he remembered Robert's words. He wasn't done yet. Ethan opened a new document on his laptop and began drafting a bold new business plan. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving. He was going to rebuild, and this time he would do it on his own terms. The first steps were always the hardest. But as the weeks passed, Ethan found himself slowly regaining a sense of control. He had secured a few small investments, each one a testament to his determination. With each new commitment, his confidence began to rebuild. But there was still so much to prove. As the new product line began to take shape, Ethan spent countless hours overseeing every detail, from the design to the marketing strategy. He was meticulous, focused, and driven in a way he hadn't been before. But the stress was beginning to show. He couldn't afford another failure. The stakes had never been higher. Late one evening, as he was working alone in the office, his phone buzzed. It was an email from a potential investor. Ethan's heart raced as he opened it, his eyes scanning the words quickly. The investor was interested. The email contained promises of large sums, even the possibility of turning the company into a global brand. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a spark of hope. But it was Ethan's meeting with the investor, Jonathan Price, was set for the following week. He spent the days leading up to it preparing for the pitch of his life. He couldn't afford to mess this up. His team had worked tirelessly on the new product line, and he needed to convince Jonathan that it was more than just a recovery effort. It was a reinvention. The morning of the meeting, Ethan stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, trying to calm his nerves. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was the nagging suspicion that there was more at play than he understood. As he entered the meeting room, Jonathan greeted him with a firm handshake, his eyes assessing. "I've seen your pitch, Ethan," Jonathan began, his tone cautious but not dismissive. "But before we move forward, there's something I need to address." Ethan's heart sank as he waited for the blow to land. Jonathan slid a folder across the table. "It seems there are some things about your past business dealings that have..." The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Ethan struggled to keep his composure as Jonathan went over the documents, detailing the issues that had emerged regarding his previous business practices. Each revelation seemed more damning than the last. The mismanagement, the failed partnerships, the accusations of financial misconduct. Ethan's breath hitched as he tried to explain, but the words felt inadequate. He had always believed in his product, in his vision, but now the very foundation of his credibility was crumbling. "These are serious allegations, Ethan," Jonathan said, his voice calm but firm. "I need to know if they're true, because if they are, this is a deal breaker." Ethan felt like the room was spinning. For a moment he didn't know what to say. How could he possibly explain away mistakes he had made, things he hadn't even known were happening at the time? But then he remembered Robert's advice. He couldn't keep running from his past. He had to face it head on. I made mistakes, Ethan said, hissed. After what felt like an eternity, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. All right, Ethan, he said, his tone softened slightly. You've got your shot. But make no mistake, the clock is ticking. We'll need a full audit of your past dealings, and I'll be keeping a close eye on how you operate moving forward. There's no room for mistakes anymore. Ethan felt a rush of relief, though it was tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. He had been given a lifeline, but the pressure to succeed had never been greater. I won't let you down, Ethan replied, his voice firm. As the meeting ended, Ethan left the building, the weight of the world still on his shoulders, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was filled with obstacles, but he had been given another chance. This time he wouldn't squander it. As he walked to his car, the wind whipped through the city streets, carrying with it a new sense of determination. This was the moment. The turning point. Everything had led to this. Back in his office, Ethan stared at the new product design mock-ups, his mind racing. The opportunity was within reach, but there was still so much to do. The weight of the past hung over him, but he couldn't let it define him. He was not the man he had been a year ago. That person had been broken, lost. Now, he had a chance to rebuild. But the question remained, could he truly overcome the mistakes of the past and create something new? Something stronger? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. Ethan wasn't giving up. He couldn't afford to. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then opened them, focusing on the task ahead. It was time to move forward, and there was no turning back. Ethan knew the moment was coming. It had been weeks since the meeting with Jonathan Price, and the pressure was mounting. Every move he made was being scrutinized. His every decision now carried the weight of his company's future, and Ethan felt the anxiety tightening around him like a vice. The new product line was set to launch, and the media was watching, waiting for him to fail. But the worst part? The relentless whispers from competitors, led by his old nemesis, David Klein. Klein had taken to social media to criticize Ethan's every move, spreading rumors about his financial troubles, the scandal, and the uncertainty of his comeback. It felt like a war, a battle not just for business but for his very reputation. Ethan stood in front of the mirror in his office, adjusting his tie once more, staring at his reflection. He didn't recognize the person he had become. The confident, driven entrepreneur who once walked into rooms with his head held high was now replaced by someone cautious, weary, and unsure. The launch day had arrived. Ethan stood in the conference room, surrounded by a few of his remaining team members, watching as the clock ticked closer to the product unveiling. Rachel, who had stuck by him through it all, gave him an encouraging smile. But even she could see the weight on Ethan's shoulders. "You've got this, Ethan. This is your moment," she said, her voice steady but filled with care. Ethan didn't respond right away. His eyes were fixed on the screen, where the product's details were being uploaded. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts about Klein's next move, the investors who were watching, and the looming fear that one mistake could undo everything. But then he remembered Robert's words, "You define the headlines, not the other way around." With a deep breath, he nodded to Rachel. "You're right. Let's make this count." The doors to the conference room opened, and the team walked out onto the stage. The lights were blinding, the crowd waiting in anticipation. Ethan stepped forward. The presentation went better than Ethan had hoped. The audience was engaged, the product was met with excitement, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of accomplishment. But as the event wound down, Ethan noticed something. In the corner of the room, David Klein stood, flanked by several of his executives. Klein's eyes never left Ethan. He wasn't just here to watch, he was here to undermine. After the presentation, Ethan was approached by one of his investors, Gregory Wells. "Ethan, good job today," Gregory said with a slight nod. "But you know Klein's not going to let this slide. He's going to come after you harder now. We need to be ready." Ethan's stomach churned. He had known Klein wouldn't give up, but hearing it from Gregory made it all too real. "What's the next move?" Ethan asked, his voice low but determined. "We fight," Gregory replied. "We show him that we're not just some underdog who can be knocked out. We're here to stay." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the battle ahead. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and media attention. Klein had escalated his attacks, using every tactic at his disposal to discredit Ethan and his company. The media was complicit, running stories about Ethan's past mistakes and the doubts surrounding his new venture. Ethan had to stay ahead of the narrative, but it was exhausting. His team was on edge, and the pressure was beginning to show. Then one morning, Ethan received a call from his lawyer. "We've got a serious problem," the lawyer said. "It looks like Klein is trying to buy out your investors, using underhanded tactics to force them to pull out." Ethan clenched his fists, frustration boiling over. "How do we fight this?" he demanded. "We have to take the fight to the courts," the lawyer replied. "It's going to get messy, but we can't let him get away with this." Ethan knew that this battle wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. Klein had crossed a line, and now it was time to show him that Ethan wasn't going. The courtroom was packed with reporters and industry insiders. Ethan stood at the front, facing the judge, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If he lost this battle, it would be the final nail in the coffin for his career. Klein's lawyer, a sharp, intimidating woman, presented her case with precision, attacking every aspect of Ethan's business practices. But Ethan remained calm, his defense solid, his words measured. He knew that the truth was on his side, and that was all he needed. As the judge deliberated, Ethan glanced across the courtroom to where Klein sat. The smirk on Klein's face was gone, replaced by a look of uncertainty. Ethan's heart raced. He had no idea how this would end, but for the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope. The battle was far from over, but he had taken the first step in regaining control. He wasn't going to lose this fight. Ethan's heart raced as he prepared for the next phase. The courtroom battle was in full swing, but it wasn't just about the legal fight anymore. The real challenge was about rebuilding his identity. With the courtroom news making headlines, Ethan's once quiet office became a hub of activity. People were watching. They were waiting to see how he would handle this crisis. Every move was under a magnifying glass, and yet, amid the chaos, Ethan found clarity. He knew what he had to do. He needed to make his next product launch the defining moment of his comeback. It wasn't just about innovation anymore. It was about proving that he had changed, that he had learned from his past mistakes. He could no longer just push forward with the same reckless ambition that had led him to the fall. It was time for a new approach, one rooted in trust, transparency, and humility. Rachel, always the voice of reason, had been working overtime alongside him, helping to rebrand the company and refresh the narrative. Ethan, this eye. The night before the product launch, Ethan stayed up late, reviewing the final details. Every aspect of the presentation had to be perfect. This was his second chance, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. As the clock ticked down, he felt the weight of the moment more acutely than ever. This wasn't just a new product. It was his legacy. Ethan's mind raced through everything that had led him here. The scandal, the betrayal, the failure. But he had learned something valuable from every single setback. He wasn't the same man who had made those mistakes. He had grown, adapted, and now he was ready to show the world that he could rise again. At that moment, Rachel walked into his office, holding a cup of coffee. "You've got this, Ethan," she said with a reassuring smile. "We all believe in you." Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Rachel. I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled softly. "You've got it in you. Just remember, this is about the future, not the past." Ethan nodded. Launch day arrived, and Ethan stood backstage, waiting for his turn to present. His heart pounded in his chest as the noise from the crowd echoed in the background. This was the moment. As he stepped onto the stage, the light seemed blinding, and the sea of faces in front of him blurred. For a brief second, everything went silent in his mind. But then, he took a deep breath and remembered Rachel's words. "This is about the future. not the past. The room fell quiet as Ethan began to speak. "Today I'm here not just to show you a product," he began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "I'm here to show you a vision, one that's bigger than anything I've ever done before. This isn't just about business. This is about building something that matters, something that stands for trust, integrity, and innovation." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I know I've made mistakes, and I've learned from them, but I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm asking you to trust me with the future." As the presentation ended, Ethan stepped off the stage, his heart still racing. The audience had responded positively, but the real test would come in the following days. Would the media, the investors, and the public buy into his vision? Or would they continue to judge him by his past? As he made his way back to the conference room, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Gregory Wells. "Ethan, great job today. The feedback is overwhelmingly positive. We'll talk tomorrow about next steps." Ethan couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, it felt like things were finally starting to go his way. But he knew this was just the beginning. There would be more battles, more challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he was ready. He had earned this moment, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. As he sat down at his desk, his mind raced with possibilities. He could see the road ahead, and it was no longer shrouded in darkness. There was light at the end of the tunnel. As the weeks passed, Ethan worked tirelessly to maintain the momentum. The launch was a success, but it wasn't enough. He had to prove that this wasn't just a fleeting moment. With the product line now out in the market, Ethan turned his focus to scaling the company and securing long-term partnerships. There were still whispers of doubt in the industry, and Klein was still lurking in the shadows, ready to take his next shot. But Ethan wasn't afraid anymore. He had faced the hardest challenge of his life and had come out on the other side. His reputation was still fragile, but it was his to rebuild, and he would do whatever it took to make sure he never lost it again. It wasn't just about being successful anymore. It was about doing it the right way. Every decision, every move would be driven by integrity and authenticity. This was the new Ethan Miller, and he was here to stay. Ethan stood in the conference room, facing the board of investors, including Gregory Wells. The stakes had never been higher. "This is it, Ethan," Gregory said. "You've proved the product works. Now, can you make the company work on a global scale?" Ethan's heart raced. This wasn't just about securing investment. It was about securing his future. "I can," Ethan replied with unwavering confidence. The room fell silent as the investors deliberated. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment. This was his final shot. After what felt like an eternity, Gregory spoke up. "We're in," he said. "But this needs to be a game changer, Ethan. We're not just looking for a product, we're looking for a movement." Ethan felt the rush of relief mixed with excitement. He had done it. But as the meeting wrapped up, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Klein had been silent for weeks, and that only made Ethan more uneasy. What was he planning next? The next day, Ethan was confronted by a new challenge. Klein had launched a media blitz, claiming that Ethan's company was on the verge of collapse. The timing was no coincidence. Ethan knew Klein was trying to destabilize everything he had worked for. But this time, Ethan had a plan. With the support of Gregory and his team, Ethan launched a counter-campaign, a bold public statement directly addressing the media and the public. "We're not backing down. We're moving forward." The next few days were a blur of media coverage, debates, and interviews. Ethan's public stance had shifted the narrative in his favor, but Klein wasn't done yet. A final showdown was coming. As Ethan prepared for the press conference, Rachel reminded him, "You've come this far, but this battle won't be over until you're standing on top." Ethan nodded. "I'm ready." The final test of his resolve was approaching. The press conference was intense, but Ethan held his ground. He addressed the media head-on, refusing to let Klein's tactics define him. "We are here to stay," he said, his voice firm. "This is not just a fight for my company. This is a fight for what's right." The media was on his side. The tables had turned, And for the first time in months, Ethan felt like he was truly in control. Weeks passed, and the media buzz around Ethan's comeback began to settle. The launch had been a success, and investors were lining up, eager to back his vision. Ethan, though exhausted, stood at the helm of a business reborn. But he wasn't done yet. The battles with Klein weren't over, but he had learned that his journey wasn't just about winning. It was about transformation. "We've come a long way, but this is just the beginning," Ethan said to his team, his voice steady. They had rebuilt the company, but more importantly, they had rebuilt themselves. The last few weeks had tested him, but Ethan had emerged stronger. He faced his failures head-on and used them to fuel his comeback. As he walked through his office, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come, from scandal to redemption, from betrayal to trust. The skeptic in his family had finally admitted that maybe he was onto something after all. The approval of his loved ones was the final piece he needed. As he looked out the window at the bustling city, Ethan realized that while the road had been long, he had made it to the other side, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. Ethan's mentor, Robert, 60, visited the office one last time. "You've done it, Ethan," Robert said, offering a rare smile. "You've turned your mistakes into your greatest strength." Ethan nodded, grateful for the wisdom Robert had given him. "It wasn't just me, Robert. It was the team. We all built this together." Robert's smile widened. "Exactly. And now you know that true success isn't about avoiding failure. It's about how you rise from it." Ethan felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the success, but for the lessons learned. He had truly transformed. As the company grew, so did Ethan's confidence. He continued to push the boundaries of innovation, always with integrity. But now, he was also focused on the impact he could have beyond business. He began speaking at industry conferences, advocating for ethical practices and resilience. His message was clear: failure wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something better. "We rise by lifting others," he said at one conference, a mantra that had guided him through the hardest moments. He was no longer just a businessman. He was a leader, ready to inspire others to rise from their own struggles. In the final moments of Ethan's journey, he stood on the rooftop of his office building, gazing at the horizon. The city sprawled below him, full of opportunities. He had faced his darkest moments, but now the light was brighter than ever. He had rebuilt not only his company but himself. I did it," Ethan whispered, a sense of peace settling over him. "We did it." He knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but for the first time, he felt ready to face them. The journey wasn't over, but the man he was now was.